So what can we take away? I'll summarize this real quick. I think what I can take away at least is that context matters. Power is not inherently good or bad or neutral. It depends on the context in which you find yourself in, or the power that's expressing itself. There's meta power in the sense of the cultural worldview that's believed by general society. There's competing powers because there's people trying to topple cultural understandings, and we all feel that currently. Christ complicates everything by not playing to our game and God dying on a cross and giving up his power.
Yeah.
What the heck? And so the Christian's called to, yes, empower, but at times, as we see throughout history, to totally give up your power in its totality because you have a promised resurrection at the end of the day. You know? So that's kind of where we're sitting with that. How does that impact your life? Go live it and see what happens. Thanks, everyone. To use the word power in a conversation typically elicits a negative response in the listener for one of two reasons. One, they are disgusted by abuse of power as a mechanism for keeping particular groups out of positions of influence. Or two, they think you're a neo-Marxist who wants to dismantle all power structures as a means of liberation. Simply put, a conversation on power is divisive. Yet we all have power in one form or another. Everyone has power that can be used for evil or good for someone or something. We can all vividly imagine abuse of power and historical wrongs because one group or person had power over another. But does that mean to have power is wrong and we need to live in a completely neutral and dismantled society? Is this even possible? In Jesus, we have the example of the ultimate power in the universe, the Word become flesh, lowering himself to assume the posture of a servant culminating on a cross. Yet he rose to glorified heights through resurrection and now sits at the right hand of God the Father to judge the living and the dead. Is power evil, and that's why Jesus rejected his power through the incarnation? Or is power good, and that's why he is seated in the heavenly throne room? How do we navigate culture and the world in a redemptive understanding of power? And what can we do to live according to the example of Jesus' posture towards power?
Take a breath, man.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to Lunch on the Way. I'm Joey, joined by Jonathan and Graeme, and that was our third take of me reading that. I really should have read it through and written it a bit differently. But yeah, welcome to this conversation. We have tons of things we want to talk about, and this is one we kind of put on the back burner for a week or two, and we're back. And even though this is what we're going to talk about today, Jonathan, in a natural course of things, came with a whole different topic to casually talk about while I was setting up our technology station. And our brains...
We'll shelve that one too.
We'll shelve that one too, and our brains are now thinking about something else. So we're going to try and get into the frame of mind here.
Yeah.
So what did you think? Well, first... How are you doing, Jonathan? It's been a few weeks.
Oh, good, man. It's good to be back with you guys.
Yeah,
I feel like I have not caught up with the conversations, though. You guys are already talking about new things.
Yeah, we're always talking.
I'm keen
Graeme.
to hear.
Yes,
Graeme
we
and
are.
I.
Keen to hear.
Yeah. How about you, Graeme?
Oh yeah, no, I'm good. You know, we're in between semesters, and so is Joey and I am looking at papers to the next course that you're running. So you're
Cool.
kind of preparing for that.
Nice. And how are you, Joey?
I'm doing really well.
Yeah?
Yesterday I was like a zombie, very little sleep.
Okay.
Today, by contrast, I'm feeling great.
Okay.
But you wouldn't think so because it took me 3 takes to read what I just read.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So we'll see how.
That's
far,
just the slack from yesterday. You know, it's the rollover, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think you know.
This is either going to be a great conversation or terrible.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to fast forward a bit. But we want to have a conversation around power mostly because it's important. But Graeme, you were reading a book.
Oh yeah,
about
so So
And it's a ministry
book.
book.
When I was it's a ministry book. So
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, well, ministry doesn't mean to say it's absent of theology. 'Cause
No.
it's implicit. But so when I was staying with Mary Kate Morse, and she'll be here next year with the Cope Conference on the church. And so part of going there was just be with them as a couple and learn something from her or gather some stuff from her. Anyway, she gave me a book, And obviously she's done a lot of work. I think she did her PhD on power and the ministry of Jesus.
Oh, okay.
And then has thought more deeply really she's in the ministry space. So she's one of the directors of the Doctor of Ministry at George Fox University in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
So she wrote a book, I think it's published in 2008, and to be honest, I've not seen many books that deal with leadership and power in thinking about that. And her book does, and she gave me this book, so I've started reading it about halfway through it. And she talked about the way in which, power, and her take on that, and I'd agree with her, that we all have power. It often goes unnamed in the dynamics of the various places and spaces that we're at. Mm-hmm. And so it's how we use that power. So it can be the power that we have, which might be interesting to name. What does that look like? She gave it 4 categories, drawing off a couple of psychologists. I think it's those categories. There are a lot more that we could say about that than the 4 categories. I think that's a bit limiting. But for the sake of a book, that's helpful. And that basically her thing is saying that we can use power for good or for bad.
Right.
I think when it's not named, then that becomes a problem. I mean, and power is a big deal. I think it is a big deal.
Yeah.
And this is an important conversation, Jonathan, because what's happening in culture with power, because you did a lot of work in kind of postmodern thought, and a lot of stuff is developed around, I guess, a neo-Marxist understanding of power when it comes to culture, when it comes to people groups. So could you even just briefly give a bit of a landscape as to, like, why a conversation of power is important at this point in time, and kind of bringing us maybe from the last, 50 or so years, really quickly, nothing crazy.
No, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
I guess perhaps before the 70s, before the 70s, 60s and 70s, power was thought to reside in certain individuals. And it was thought the theory was that it was thought to, reside in individuals, in families, in corporations, in nation states. And with the work of Michel Foucault, who was a French philosopher, he came up with a new theory that, in fact, power is way more pervasive than that. It doesn't reside in certain people, and it doesn't reside in individuals. It resides in the culture itself. So it's much deeper and it's more dispersed than that. And that power actually resides in the culture and the thinking of the culture itself. Everybody, even the people that seem to outwardly have power, are caught up in power plays themselves. So, and I guess the way to say that is that it's the ideology of the culture that is the power itself. Because that determines how the world can show up to you. It determines what you think life is truly about. So for us, we would say, well, capitalism perhaps is an underlying power play.
Yeah, that's the big critique in modern culture now, is 100%. Anti-capitalism.
Yeah, so to get to that, you need to know that power isn't in a corporation. It doesn't reside in one person. It resides in the way that you view what the world is. And for us, that would be science. It would be probably that Western worldview. That's why there's such a pushback against the Western worldview, because it's the worldview that is truly the powerful thing here, not the people. We're all caught up in it. We can't do anything about it unless we can absolutely rock the way that people understand what life is about. And so what you see now is people trying to completely break down and change the way that we view the world, the way that we view what is valuable in life.
See,
so before that, we would try to take down corporations. If we can get rid of a new government, we'll be okay. If we can just get rid of Google, we'll be okay. But what underlies that, what Foucault was saying, is that no, nothing will change. Power will still reside in the knowledge of the culture itself. You need to absolutely rupture that. You need to change the way that people think what life is truly about. And once you do that, you change the power.
So in you describing that right now, I'm seeing some very clear parallels to what Sam was talking about around the modern meaning crisis. So
that's exactly right.
So I think we'll jump back into this in a second, but let's go on a little bit of a tangent here to kind of connect it, to make it more real for people, in a sense.
Yeah.
So this this modern understanding of power that it's Foucaultian influenced, then sees that these structures or worldviews need to be dismantled so something else can be built up.
That's right.
Or so different worldviews can be in positions of power that otherwise weren't there.
That's right.
And so they can have a voice. But when you do that, when you dismantle and you have nothing, what does that do?
Yeah, that's still a power. So there is no neutral space. I think Foucault would say,
That's a really good point. There is no neutral space.
Nothing's neutral.
Yeah.
Nothing is neutral. And this is Foucault at the most nihilistic. And perhaps you could argue that it's all nihilistic, that it's simply just another power play that comes in. So this is what you often hear in pop culture, everything's a power play. Because the next people that are trying to dismantle the current culture are going to set up their own one. And at some point, that true will form the boundaries of what life is about for us and everyone else. That is a power play. Everyone is always caught up in power. It doesn't reside in one person. We are all getting played. That would be a Foucault understanding of what the world is. And you see that playing out all the time in what we would now call woke culture.
It's a constant deconstruction and critique of itself.
It's a constant deconstruction.
Yeah.
That's right. And everyone's caught up in a power play.
All because because there's a virtue, it seems like under that structure, to have power is not virtuous.
Yeah.
To be somebody who doesn't have power is virtuous.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's an anomaly, though.
Yeah, that's not true either.
That's not true.
But that's not true, but that seems to be the perception, because that's why you need to topple people in power or topple cultural ideas.
Yeah.
Because it seems like if you are, like, for example, if someone has a lot of money, they're perceived as evil for some reason. Mm-hmm. It's like if someone has a little bit of has no money, they're virtuous.
Yeah, that's right.
What I find, which is clearly not black and white. You cannot view the world like that and actually be consistent in any way, and have proper relationships with people in general.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating, what Tom Holland points to, is how that assumption is actually very Christian, but it's like a mutation and like a Frankenstein's monster of it, in a sense.
Yep.
Where because the first will be last and the last will be first, that's been warped to fit that narrative, this cultural power play narrative.
Yeah, yeah.
To where the person who is oppressed is virtuous,
Mm-hmm. And that in a sense is power in itself.
Well,
because then, so what's powerful about the notion of being virtuous means that because that's human. As humans, that's good.
Yeah, yeah.
It's perceived to be good.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
But so that's the background. Yep. This is kind of where we find ourselves in. I don't think this is anything new. I think we've been perceiving this for a while. It kind of came to a head, I feel like, around 2018, 2019.
Yep.
Definitely 2017, but I felt like those 3 years we were kind of really working it out.
Yeah.
And we're like, holy crap, this, and it exercised its ugly head a little bit too much. And we got to see really what was going on, culturally speaking, around this understanding of power.
Yep.
And there's now people pushing back against that and wanting to go to maybe more of a modern, middle of the 20th century understanding of the world.
Yeah.
But the territory is still very contentious, but it still begs the question: what is the proper place and posture of power? Yeah. What? Yeah. Because let's just get down to the practicalities of it. We can obviously, from how you've explained it, power is a cultural worldview type expression.
Yep.
And that's it's almost like meta. That's its like highest point, it seems like.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
But if we get down to the nitty-gritty of just everyday life.
Yeah, everyday life. Yeah, that's right.
Graeme, this book you're talking about refers to, if I recall from what you sent in the group chat, it refers to the environments and the positions and the postures that leaders have, and Christian leaders in particular have when leading other people, and the things they need to be aware of, that, hey, you actually have power, whether you know it or not, even by where you sit in the room, communicates a power to somebody else, and it actually might hinder what you might actually want to have accomplished. So those are two very different power conversations, but they're important.
So I wonder whether part of this is actually
Yeah,
beginning
they play with each
is
other.
to name, is to you know,
Okay.
because when you don't name something,
Yeah.
it becomes the elephant in
Yeah,
the room.
yeah.
That there's no language to say actually. You can't even describe. You can't even describe the fact when you walk in a room, and you know when you walk in a room, how the desks are set, who's sitting, what's that?
Is that your phone, Jonathan?
That's my phone.
You just want to let it ring? Or do you
yeah,
want
I'll let it ring.
All right, keep going, Graeme.
So the way you walk into a room, or the way that you sit in a room, the way that whole posture is, there's a whole sense of power being manifest there.
Yeah.
I think another way. I mean, when I was doing my PhD, I looked at power in terms of the visual thing, and then tracked it back to the whole idea of coinage.
Right.
And the emblem
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
the
right.
king
Yeah.
or the emperor on the coin.
True.
Even the arena.
Yep.
The arena was a propaganda mechanism.
Yeah.
Because who sat where in the arena was important.
Right.
And particularly, I think, who reinforces this? I think Augustus reinforces this.
Yeah.
And then it's later on, it's reinforced again.
Right.
But even the notion of killing animals Rome is even over creation itself.
Right.
So there's so power's being exerted in the culture again, but it's a visual reality. It's something visually that's being picked up. So I think visual power is a really important one.
Yeah, that's really good. And so if we're going to name our power, because I think that's good, and then I would I'd say something about context. I think context is has a huge role in this too. So our power would probably be we're all white males, right? That in our context that has a power.
That's important. Context is clearly important because there's contexts that I walk into where I feel no ability.
That's why I
that's
think
important.
Context.
Absolutely,
you always got to have context in the play. And here we come back to the interplay between the particulars, us, and the context, which is the greater cultural climate that we're in, because it could all change, and we could be without power at any moment. But our culture gives us power at the moment. So you can see how Foucault is kind of saying it's actually the culture that holds the power. The context, another way to say that, the context holds the power. But ours would be we're white males. I mean, even that we have a podcast.
Yeah, that's right. And it's power being
We have a voice, gives us power.
Yes.
Over someone who doesn't have a voice.
Yes.
What else about our context?
Let's
We're all educated. That's another.
Right. Yeah,
we're pretty highly educated. That's another power play.
So our education is also giving us power.
We're all in employment. That gives us another power.
Yep.
So
clergy, former or current.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So our status is
some areas of culture that's less status, but context matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's some of our power. And those are the only ones that we can name. I mean, it's the ones that we can't see probably that are.
Those are the obvious ones, but I think even when you're saying power,
yeah,
because of I think because of the conditioning I have through the cultural conversations on power, I see every time you use the word power, I kind of like, oh, that's negative, that's negative, that's negative.
Totally.
But it's not.
Point. No, it's not.
It's really clear to name those things and to say there's actually power in that, or there's perceived power from that, is not to say that's a bad thing.
Right.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Where
somebody who is you would popularly classify as woke or a cultural Marxist in that sense, in the most extreme, far leftist expression of that, they would see any conversation with power, anyone who has power is bad. Mm-hmm. But they want it.
You're right.
See, that's the thing. Power's bad, but I want it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to name and to say that power in and of itself is not bad.
Right.
To be somebody who has particular advantages is not bad in and of itself. Because it's what do you do with those particular positional or cultural or even biological advantages. So for example, let's just make it as biological as possible. Some people are 6'7". And they have power over others who are maybe 5'7".
Right.
Yeah. Also your looks give you power.
Is it bad that they are 6'7"?
That's a good point.
Looks.
That's so true.
How symmetrical is your face?
All of that.
All of that.
So
true.
It's all giving us cues.
That's a really good point. It's a good point.
Where you're sitting in the space.
Yeah.
I think the thing is that if we start to talk about it and name it, then let me just flow back. When I was in a pastoring position, I did think a lot about this, because I thought, actually, my voice is always going to be heard more above everybody else as a pastor of the church.
Yes.
And the way in which I treat another person, I'm in a position of privilege, so I can do a lot of damage. I can lift up and I can drop. So I need to be aware of that. Mm-hmm. It's partly because it's positional. That's positional power. So it's how I use that power and my self-awareness of what I do with it and how I treat another human being.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that's what becomes the importance part of it.
Yep.
So it's not that power's wrong.
Yeah.
It's just being conscious
Yep.
of how we're using it and that we've got it.
Yep. But it's that's a really good point. But it's not that it's wrong. So it can be used for good and bad, which is what you're saying. But it's also not neutral, right?
No, it's not neutral.
So
exactly.
So it never at any point, you
No.
can have a neutral kind of power. It's always doing something. It's either so. What are we saying this? Power is always doing something good or something bad.
Yeah.
Are we saying that? It never sits in a neutral space. Are we saying that at every moment, whatever power that you have, whatever power you're involved in, it is either doing something bad or something good?
Well, let's go with the biological, because it's way easier to name and to not classify as just inherently bad, because you can't prevent your biology.
No, that's
you
what I'm
can't
saying.
you
It
can't
just
change
is,
your
isn't it?
biology. It is what it is. Well, you can.
Sure.
You can probably do certain things nowadays. But so, for example, if we just go with the person who's incredibly tall versus somebody who's short.
Yep.
If the person who's tall, say 6'7", walks into a room, like you said, there is no neutral power.
Yeah.
There's a perceived power in that moment because that person is tall, physically stares down at people, is probably physically stronger than everybody else in the room.
Uh-huh. You're just talking to two guys that are incredibly short.
No.
So and you're going to. I see what's going on here.
I don't see it like that. See, the context matters. I don't see it like that. No. But versus somebody who's 5'7", it's a different posture and a different power in the room. So I think what you're saying, Graeme, with this particular book, the person who you met, who authored it, that person who's taller needs to understand, and they do. We all intuitively actually do understand this, how people perceive them when they walk into a room. And they're not bad because of it.
No.
It's just that there's a different dynamic at play because of that, right? And that's okay. It's okay. It's just there's a different dynamic.
Yeah.
And what's ironic and interesting is usually the taller you are, the more of a friendly giant you are.
Right.
Because of its overcompensation, because of that perception of who you are. You have a softer spoken personality because you're offsetting that intuitively, which I think is fascinating. You got to watch out for those 6'1" guys like me.
Yeah, exactly.
Who are just like a bit taller but not giants. We're crazy. Anyway, but that's just one point to bring forward. What do you have, Graeme?
Yeah,
you got some
I was
thoughts?
just thinking about
Okay.
desire, the way in which, so we all have power, and it plays out in different ways.
Yeah.
Education can give you power in places. Your looks can give you power. Your ability to broadcast.
Yeah.
So that's what I think Facebook and some other things is. You're trying to get. If you're an influencer, you're looking for power. So what's sitting behind that? I wonder, and I don't know whether that's helpful to think about desire, but that's how I've thought about it. How our desires are pointed, because my desire might be to do something, and therefore I'm going to use my power to get that.
Right.
Which then raises the question of ethics and morals.
Yeah, that's right.
How do I use that power? And because the desire can be, as we know, at a very macro level, and history would tell us, the desire of the Nazis was not good.
Yep.
So
that's right.
So so desire, but where does that come from? It comes from a notion of wanting something beyond, and is that desire? How our desire is pointed, I think, is quite a good question.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I don't really know where this fits, but I'll just throw it in there anyway, because the other part of power, I mean, there's Foucault where he's, coming back to postmodern, which I think is, that probably our cultural climate, is that Nietzsche would say that there's another type of power. Yeah. He's before Foucault, so Nietzsche would say there's a will to power.
Yeah.
There's a power to want power.
Yeah.
And to assert power.
Yeah.
So it's another way of understanding the world, and is to say, hey, someone has power, I'm going to get it. And I don't have much. I'm going to assert whatever I do have to make sure that you don't have that power. And I think we see that playing out all the time.
Yes,
Certainly, maybe American politics, we see this to power.
Yeah, well, you see it in churches too.
And you see it in churches.
Absolutely,
yeah, you see it all the time.
I mean, that's just, or even in organisations.
Yeah.
To want to, we're going to do this. And so the way in which that is constructed and outworked. There may be several ways of getting there.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So here's a question, and this is a question that I often kind of bat around in my own mind. Okay, so what do we do with power? Do we use it if we do have power, and we are saying that everybody has power in some sort of way? You have power, no matter how powerless you feel. In some kind of way, you do have power. So do you use that power that you do have for good? That's one option. Or do you divest yourself of it? Should we be giving away power? Just giving it away because it's so powerful that you let's just give it away. Like all the power that you have, just try and get rid of it. Or do you use it for good?
Because I think about that. I thought about this because I mean, again, I'm reflecting about in the Christian story. So there's no doubt that power is playing into the Christ story.
Definitely.
Because, I mean, the John 13, the kind of anabino, the coming down.
Right, yeah.
And serves, washes the feet.
Yeah.
This is what you need to do, And then, of course, that plays out in the story that actually the very power is surrendered. I mean, it's quite challenging that.
Yeah.
And then it flips over in the resurrection. But then it raises the question of, so is power, and this is what helps me, I'm not sure about giving it away, but the choice to empower.
Yeah, I was about to say that word. Yeah.
Empower.
Okay.
How will I use my power?
Right.
So
using your power for good. Yeah.
So that notion of how. So that's my question to myself as well. How do I empower this person?
Yeah.
Rather than disempower them.
Right.
Well,
but how do you know you're doing good?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, that's a deep.
Because it's
What is the good?
Oh, let's not go there today.
Yeah, no.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
No, you can't. Well, can I answer your question first? And then
Yeah.
maybe if we want to, we can get closer to that. Because there's individual answers to your question, and then there's governmental answers to the question. So an example would be that whenever you give power away, like you lose it, like you don't empower what you're describing, Graeme. You're just like passing it off and then vacating the situation. Is essentially what it means to give up power.
Yeah.
It creates a vacuum. And so classic political theory says that whenever there's a power vacuum, and it follows within Nietzsche's philosophy, people who have a will to power come in, and you don't know what their motivations are.
Definitely.
And they come and fill that vacuum.
Yeah,
that's right.
And so the classic example is when, and I am not at all advocating for any political ideology whatsoever in saying this, it's just a clear historical example now. When Biden pulled out of, Iraq or Afghanistan? I forget what country it was when the U.S. pulled out. Afghanistan. And almost immediately, the Taliban took over the country again.
Yeah. There's a backstory to that, though, and I think that's a misreading. Because
I'm not saying. See, this is why I qualified it initially. I'm not saying they should have even been there. I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is that just clearly illustrates one thing: that there's a cause and there's an effect. That there's a vacuum. I'm not saying they shouldn't have left. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that there's no neutral space. It's not like,
exactly
the Americans left, and now the people are going to be left to do their own individual things. Clearly not. That's not what happened at all. So to say that giving up power is a very viable option, I think is not the way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think I'm more in line with Graeme saying it is to actually empower. So when I see that story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, I don't think he lost power.
No.
At all. No. His status, who he is, not only ontologically, but with his disciples, stayed the same. I think what he did was he empowered his disciples to further model what it looked like to be, to be like God in the world, in a sense.
Yeah, here I'm not so sure.
No?
And I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And here's where I mean, man, it's a tricky one because I agree, but Jesus does give up his power because he gets killed.
Yeah, keep talking and I'll think about it.
Yeah. he does give away power. He does create a vacuum. He does divest himself of any kind of will to power that he could, even good will to power. He gives it all away and
does
allows.
This say something about power at a far, far deeper level, a mystery.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if
a mystery, because we know the power of the death, resurrection story.
Yeah. We
know the ending to that.
We do know the ending to it, but oh man, there's something here that I'm just kind of I'm like trying to chew down on. I'm like, there's something there, because I do see Jesus giving up power completely to the point of death.
Yeah,
he gave
fair enough.
up his life to the point of death. And I just wonder about that. I wonder why he did that, and what it means to give away power.
You know what I imagine when I see that?
I don't know.
The visual
to become the full.
The visual I have.
That's another.
So then,
you should go.
The visual I have to that is: have you seen those like cosmological Neil deGrasse Tyson documentaries, where it's like the universe began and it was like, whoosh, and like everything in the universe like shrinking down to like a tiny atom.
Right.
And I see that visual, and I see that with Jesus giving up his power. What you're saying, almost like into death. But then what happens?
Oh yeah.
It just Big Bang eruption. So it's almost like
yes.
To say that but you can't understand the cross without understanding the resurrection. You actually to live in that moment is to not actually theologically do Jesus' life and ministry, death and resurrection justice. So it's almost like that moment where it's like
okay,
and then
well let's do it justice and not jump too quickly to the resurrection.
No, well, fair enough.
Let's not go there too quickly, because there's 3 days here where the disciples and the woman and everyone who followed him realized that power doesn't reside. Power doesn't reside in holding on to it, even doing good with it. It resides in completely giving it away, because they are shocked. They are shocked by that someone with any kind of amount of power would give it up to the point of death. And for 3 days, they see something of a truth being unfolded here that then gets put back together in the resurrection. I just don't want to jump too quickly from the cross. I think there's something in the middle play between the cross and the resurrection that tells us something about power here that I think we need to just
I'm finding more connections as you're talking now, because if you look at the example of the first 3 centuries of the church, it's complicated, sure, but the overarching identification that they find with Jesus is his suffering.
The suffering,
right? That's the overall identification.
Yes,
that's right, and I think there's something
of that.
there.
There's something that goes on.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the Philippians. I'm just trying to remember the quote. The Philippians Christological thing.
Yeah. Yes, he was
the start of 2.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah.
So there's a sort of letting go of who he was.
Yes.
So, which says there's a mystery about power, and
there is.
At a very practical level, I remember a number of years ago doing this thing for Brethren Camp, Leaders Camp, and so Linda and we drew on Gorman's cruciformity. And so he talks a lot about, so he's really reflecting on Pauline spirituality.
Yeah.
So he picks up on faith, hope, and love, but he actually includes another element as the notion of power.
Oh.
And I'm just trying to remember what in there. But what was interesting in that Brethren context, so service and sacrifice were elements of expression of power.
Yep.
So service. And they said, look, the problem is that sacrifice, we feel like we're sacrificing ourselves just like, the challenge with to give away power is I'm just going to get beaten up. And that's actually what does happen.
That's exactly
and
right.
I go, I don't know how to work this out. Because in a Pentecostal
right.
thing, I would be going, actually, we really need to take cue of this. Actually, we have to be really mindful that Pentecostal pastors sit in a position of power. How do we use that power? You need to think about service. And you need to think about sacrifice. But in another tradition, don't talk to us about sacrifice. We're powerless. We haven't got any.
That's right.
That's part of the problem.
That's part of the problem, yeah.
So
Context.
So then we get into this. Then we're in a
conversation
now. We're
now.
really wrestling
Yeah.
with. Now we're really wrestling with power because
Yeah.
I agree because yes, we have power. Yes, to give away power means you're going to be overlooked. It means you're going to be beat up upon. It means you're going.
Well,
it means
been
no
in
one's
power-
going to listen to you anymore.
Have you ever been in a powerless
and
situation?
how do you
It's
give that
horrible.
away? Exactly, it's really hard. It's really hard, and especially when you've had a taste of it. How do you give that up again? And okay, so now we're in the real wrestle of what is power?
So
How involved are we in it?
Here's another little thing.
Yeah.
Human life. I've watched it. You've watched your grandparents. Are your grandparents still alive?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as they get older, and as we get older, and you find in your family as your kids get older, your power will diminish as your voice.
Yeah.
And the same, as now we're grandparents.
Yep.
And our voice is diminishing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a
Yeah,
Western.
and then what you
right.
see, I've seen my mother.
That's
She's
interesting.
88, and I'm watching her, and I'm going, one of the things of trying to with kids is how do we help her just keep the power that she has,
Yeah.
not reduce and reduce it, because
That's a
actually
good
the
point.
reality is it's going to reduce.
It is, and she's.
It's
Good
all
point.
going to come down to
It's
the
all
end.
gonna reduce.
We're
Yeah.
completely powerless, and now we're subservient to death.
Yeah, and everyone who's walked through somebody with that,
And we're all going to have to go
My
there.
grandfather
That's a great
last
point.
year, same thing.
That's a
It's
great
just,
So the
Yeah.
inevitability of death is absolute powerlessness.
Yeah.
you still have grandparents?
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
How old are you?
Getting older, Joey.
47.
Getting older.
Oh my goodness. All right, you're right, Graham. You're absolutely right. It's.
And those 6'1" guys, honestly.
I know.
Ask the hard questions.
It's like an expose.
Yeah.
On Jonathan. No,
Yeah.
I think you're right. And Jonathan, you messed with my brain because I don't want to. Empowering sounds so much better to me
Oh man, it sounds better to me too.
because it's not lording power over people; it's raising people up. How could you be more
Yeah.
Christian than that?
And
Exactly.
maybe that's
Yeah.
nuanced in thinking
100%.
about. It's not wrong to think
No,
about
I'm with you.
empowering
Yeah.
somebody.
Yeah, that's
No, it's
right.
not
But it's
wrong.
also,
But what does it mean
but
though?
yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
What does it mean to give away power? I mean, actually, at a really practical level,
what
it's
is
really
it-
interesting
yeah.
how this might work. And when you start thinking of team ministry and working as a team,
Right.
how's power being worked in? here?
Man, good point.
How-
Talking out of
Yeah.
How do you?
Good point.
How do you not divest power but share power?
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Share voice.
Yep.
I actually there's a whole lot of practical things
Yeah.
that sit around this.
Yep.
That are maybe really important for us to think about, and we don't.
No, we don't. Yeah.
We're kind of using what we've got to get what we want. I
Yes.
know that sounds really selfish, but I think partly
Yeah,
it's not
no,
it's
that's
not
right.
explicitly selfish because it's kind of like we've got this goal, we need to get these things done, but in the process, I think we actually use our power that actually diminishes another human being in ways that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't get this. Like, I just don't feel comfortable with this. Or I just feel like I've been railroaded. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you hear those sort of comments
All the
Or I don't
time.
feel like I've been listened to. Or I don't feel like I've been respected. I don't feel significant. I don't feel human. You hear all these things.
Yeah, you do.
So what's going on there? And I'd say that actually it's the context or the way in which the good may be going for there, but the way it's been played out
Yeah,
somehow
that's good
just
too.
doesn't resonate quite with the gospel that we'd like it to.
Yeah.
It's a
Does
good
that
point,
make
man.
sense?
Yeah, it
I
does.
missed the first
That's
bit, but I
really
think
good.
where you're
It was
going.
really good, yeah.
I think so. If we use the early church as a structure, and this is obviously broad because we don't know every single church and every single,
Yeah.
diocese, if you want to use that distinction, or city or whatever.
Yep.
Parachurch. Parachurch, or who knows. But clearly within the church there was a hierarchy, no doubt, very early on.
Yes.
Established.
Yes.
Apostles.
Yep. That's
and,
a good point.
So there were
Yeah.
positions of power, and that's clear. And they didn't have any problem with that
No.
whatsoever.
Good point.
But how they related to the general culture seemed to be one of assuming a posture of suffering. So if we look at Paul's example, I forget where in his epistles he says this, but he counts it. This is a massive paraphrase, but he considers it a good thing for him to suffer on behalf of Christ, because he's suffering alongside Christ.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to outside of the church, suffering is like almost a virtuous posture, it seems like.
Yeah.
But inside the church, it seemed like a hierarchy was essential to maintain unity.
Yeah, and make decisions.
And make decisions.
That's a
and
good
clarify
point.
doctrine and and to pass on tradition. All this is very important. So,
yes.
So when we're talking about like giving up power or empowering, I wonder, like you said, Jonathan, very early on, the context matters.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man.
It deeply matters.
Yeah.
Because within the church, I'm not saying that, pastors should dismantle their power and give it up to then there will be disunity and there will be chaos and confusion because somebody needs to be in charge or groups of people or a designated eldership or however you want to distinguish it. They need to be in charge. But as we relate to culture and as we relate to the rest of the world outside of the ecclesial structures, what does that look like?
Man, I don't have any answers to that, but it makes me think. It makes me think of a title of a book, that the church is for the life of the world. So the church is is like a mini world inside of the larger culture that shows the rest of the world what it is to live lives that are based upon God. And so there's still a structure inside of there, but but we're doing something new with power that the world that outside of the church can look in on and say, okay, there's another way to live. And it comes back to that Foucault kind of thing. In my mind, it comes back to that anyway, is that it's the flipping it's the changing of the way that you understand what life is. That is where you start to turn power over. You bring in a new kind of way of seeing the world. And the church is exactly that. It's a different world inside the world.
So
way to
the
live.
way,
Anyway,
so
that's
is that
kind of-
at
that's
a
me
practical
just
level?
reading
Does that mean that our experience of power is different?
Exactly. Sorry, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it's
our
not
experience of power in the church must
it's
be
not
different.
there's no power here. Our experience of power actually is it's reframed. I guess. I mean, and we didn't really get that mystery of Christ.
Yeah.
The death.
Yeah.
And the loss of power.
No, but there's something
There's something mysterious going on there because it's
yeah.
not the loss. Power changes. It changes. Something happens, and maybe that's kind of how our experience of power.
Yeah.
When maybe it's as even as like saying like this. Well, you do me wrong.
Yeah.
And I will use my power to get even.
Yeah. Yeah.
The flip side of that is the story invites us to participate in the forgiveness of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to forgive.
Yep.
Not because it's in me to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yep.
and that we don't know why and how it happens, but somehow that animosity and power to get even and revenge dissipates.
Yes. Yep.
So there's something, that's why I go, as you picked up before, there's something really profound and mysterious about Christ's emptying himself.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Emptying himself.
Emptying himself.
There's something
Yeah.
there, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's something there that is a cue for us as a church, as church communities.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a good question, man. I don't know.
Well,
have to think
if
about
nothing
that.
else, it invites us to think about it.
It invites us to think about it. Yeah, that's right. It opens up a little. Yeah,
And I think
a
that's
space
where
for us to think something
back
new.
to Mary Kate Morse's book.
Yeah.
I think that's where she's
Right.
where she's going
Yeah.
with that. She's
Yeah.
inviting us to think about, and she's used various categories,
Mm-hmm.
good or to think about how we might in the church in terms of leadership think about power. And the reason she's saying that because it's in a context where power's being misused.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And it's I mean, and she gives various illustrations in the book of like, the guy that's doing great. He's an elder at the church and he's got a lot to say, but then on Monday morning he's got employees and he's treating them bad and he's ripping off people. You know? We've seen that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's an incoherence there.
Part of me thinks that maybe this, just throwing this out there, that power often plays on kind of scarcity. So there's always a scarcity, and I need, you've got something that I need, and if I don't get it, I'm going to be out of pocket, I'm going to be out of status, I'm going to be out of whatever it is. And inside the church, what you see is no scarcity. This power structures are set up for the flourishing of every person.
Yeah.
So, and because there's no, and the reason that because there's no scarcity is because the church understands that behind everything, the material world, everything they have, there's a life that just comes and comes and comes. And that's the life of God. So the power structures are set up in such a way that it funnels life out to people. It's constantly...
Ideally.
Yeah, sorry, this is ideally.
Ideally.
So the church, when it's set up in the best possible way, it has a hierarchy of people that are able to pass that power through to all people. Yeah. So in fact, there is no hierarchy in a kind of very meta sense, because everyone is receiving what they need to receive in order to pass it on to the next person. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because I think about what is love, and which is everything comes back to love, faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Love is willing the best of the other.
Yes.
And what does Christ do when he gives away his power completely? He's willing the best of the world. And to do that, he has to show that I don't have to hold on to anything for you to be who you are.
Yeah.
I can give it all away because the life keeps coming. Yeah. Because God is the source of all things. So he gives it away.
Yeah.
And that is shocking. Because at some level, I think, we live out of a life of scarcity. Mm-hmm. Let me just hold on to one thing. But that one thing is the thing between you and God. Whatever that one thing is, you are holding on to that rather than God. And Christ even gives away, he gives away the one thing.
This notion of, again, because I do like that passage because I keep thinking about it, keep coming back, is the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
So
blessed are the meek.
Yeah, well,
blessed are the poor.
Jesus gives us heavenly prayer. This is the Lord's prayer.
Yeah.
Then he plays with. I think it goes into where your heart is, there your treasure is also.
That's right.
What seems to be playing is this human reality of finding security
in anything other than God.
And I was looking at it last
be
night,
that
and
your
I found
looks,
that
be that your education,
food
be that
and clothing become the kind of components.
Yeah.
Clothing can be, and it seems to be in that passage, that clothing is about status. The way I dress.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's a good point.
So what's that about? It's about my significance and identity.
That's a good point.
And Jesus is saying, well, actually, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Because actually, look to creation. I'm actually present in the world.
Yeah.
And that's so I wonder whether it's partly, our misuse of power is again, which will come back to desire, is sort of the pointing of desire.
Right.
That's why we make idols, because we think that I'll be secure then.
Yeah.
That'll frame my space in this world.
Yeah.
Well, the ideal picture that you painted of the church in an ideal sense.
Yeah.
That actually explains to me why Paul was so upset over social issues in the church. So when you said that, the most prime example I can think of was the 1 Corinthians issue around the Lord's Supper.
Right.
Where the big issue was around these more well-off, richer Corinthians who didn't have to work as long, showing up to their evening meal and eating and partaking in the Lord's Supper, eating the meal before everyone else could show up.
Yeah.
So they had a scarcity mentality.
Yeah, man.
They weren't loving their fellow Christians, and they were exercising their power and influence and status in society to the detriment of those who they're called to love.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And,
that's really good.
And so one of the most misquoted passages and misunderstood passages is where Paul says, make sure you examine yourselves before you partake in the Lord's Supper. He's not looking for inward examination. He's literally saying, look around in the room. Is everybody present? No. Don't do it.
Oh, that's
because this
it's good.
Really good.
Don't do it. And because if you want to read Paul through a lens of power, which seems a bit reductionistic, but sometimes it does work. I think in this particular case it does work. Paul was really concerned about what that was communicating to the whole church, that some people are more important than others.
Wow. That's awesome.
That's very good.
That's
Yeah.
why I have a master's in New Testament studies.
And I will be preaching on that this Sunday.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a good
yeah,
point.
so-
It's a good point.
Yeah, I like that thing is, don't, that, because often that particular passage, we subjectify that passage.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an internal self-examination.
Yeah.
Well,
which-
subjective, right?
Yeah, it's very subjective.
Yeah.
But if you go, well, let's have a look around you,
Yeah, that's very interesting.
That's very good.
Yeah, and I think it works again to context. I think that works the way the opposite way that that it's been interpreted for the individual. We're such an individualistic culture that, of course, we think about ourselves when we read it. But I wonder if, in their context, they think in we kind of terms. That it is he is thinking, like you say, of the communal kind of understanding of what
Yeah, I didn't mean to derail the conversation through getting to a biblical text.
No,
here.
no, it's really interesting. It's really great, man.
But I did look at, most Bible commentaries say that no, this is a really widely misunderstood passage.
Oh man, it's so interesting.
Yeah,
it's good.
it's not because this is a tangent. We probably should end actually soon. But
Yeah.
it's actually to say you need to look inwardly and
Yeah.
and ponder things in your heart before you partake in the Lord's Supper sounds nice, but it's actually antithetical to the theology of table,
Right.
where Jesus invites even
yeah,
the prostitute to his table.
Good
right
point.
before she's even done anything.
Interesting.
So it's
Oh, see, that's fascinating
see
too.
you don't have to be perfect to come to Christ. That's the whole point of the gospel, right? And so to assume, I need to confess all my sins and do all these
Right.
different things. No, coming to the table is a confession.
Right.
It's actually receiving grace when you don't deserve it.
Right.
So
It's so funny though, eh?
Yeah.
The Protestant in you is showing because there's other verses of don't partake of this because you make it a foolish kind of thing. If you come here just thinking that anyone can partake of Christ, you do need to forgive, have given up your sins, and you do need to
maybe
have
it is.
repented to be able to take
Maybe
that.
I'm focusing too much on the Gospels and not on Paul.
Yeah,
Who
yeah, yeah.
knows?
But I think
Maybe.
I guess my point here is that there's a really interesting tension between those two.
Yeah.
It's probably not. It's both and.
Interesting, just to finish off.
Yeah.
She takes us, and we started off there about how important context was.
Yeah.
In her book, she shifts to space.
Mm-hmm.
As she
Right.
writes public space, what was it, social space, relational space, or personal space, and then she goes intimate space. So she's playing with those things that actually power works around that, and how do we think about those spaces?
Yeah.
And actually the power dynamics in those.
Yeah, interesting.
Alter.
Yeah, right.
And play an important part there, which is really what you're saying about
Yeah.
context, I think.
So what can we take away? I'll summarize this real quick. I think what I can take away at least is that context matters. Power is not inherently good or bad or neutral. It depends on the context in which you find yourself in, or the power that's expressing itself. There's meta power in the sense of the cultural worldview that's believed by general society. There's competing powers because there's people trying to topple cultural understandings, and we all feel that currently. Christ complicates everything by not playing to our game and God dying on a cross and giving up his power.
Yeah.
What the heck? And so the Christian's called to, yes, empower, but at times, as we see throughout history, to totally give up your power in its totality because you have a promised resurrection at the end of the day. So that's kind of where we're sitting with that. How does that impact your life? Go live it and see what happens. Thanks, everyone.